Hello, everybody. We are here for the Philosophy Society. It's June 14th, 2023. Just going to let some people join the room, online virtual room. Yes. So organizational stuff. There's a lot of area of growth. And when you look at like the market segment, you know, like religion has been propagating, like there's a need for that kind of stuff. And it's just that, like, I don't think that scripture or dogmatic belief systems ought to take the entire market segment, you know, nor cults. You know, there's a place for an organization that's based in reasoning, that's open to all social groups, that helps us be pro-social, you know? And I think that's wise. I think that's a wise thing.
One of my friends was arguing that if you look at social media, like people who are popular, right? Like the strange Korean bands that are all there. Like there are sort of replacing, for some people, it's like they're becoming their god, right? So people are finding different gods, sort of like they may think that it's very different from religion, but if they're following this person, they know all about that, then it's like, well, to what extent does it, right? Does it correlate? Go ahead.
Could veganism become a sort of have a sort of religious fervor to it as well? Because I find that people that go from being vegetarian to being vegans, there are so many rules involved, and it almost feels like if you're not going to go all the way, you're not considered kind of good enough. There's a puritanical kind of element to it, which I find somewhat religious in its nature. Be mistaken.
Yeah, well, like religion, in a lot of ways, will have some divine intervention element. And then that divine intervention has imposed their ideas through the medium of scripture, right? And a prophet or follower of a prophet kind of transcribes this, whatever the God has said or the gods have said. And then there's like a sociocultural institution that tries to uphold these values or practices. And so that's kind of like what a religion is, you know? And so there can be social movements or political movements that are different than a religious organization or a religious group, right? So like religious groups, you know, there's a huge appeal to tradition here and dogmatism or being dogmatic. And that's like unquestioning beliefs, you know? And so that's not good. Like we want to, like being philosophical from purely a rational inquiry methodology kind of resists that entirely. Like everything, including inquiry itself, is open for inquiry. So it kind of becomes like self-referential at some point, but you know, that's not ad infinitum, like it's to a certain degree. So as like a social organization, we have like our Venn diagram again, and then this one's like religion, and then, you know, we have like cults, and then we have like political institutions, and then we would have educational institutions, and then some form of like a social movement, which is very similar to like a political institution. It's just that they might not be imposing like policy changes. They may try to lobby for such things, but it's not directly related to like the House of Commons or Senate, you know? Well, being philosophical, so on the one hand, we have reason as a methodology, right? And then two would be this like how to live our lives, like just living, or what Aristotle would call practical wisdom. In some ways, practical wisdom from Aristotle is, you know, very focused on virtues, but we can expand that to other facets as well. So to say that we have a philosophical organization, where would it fall within? This is not necessarily an exhaustive list, but part of the reason that all of these things occur is that we have psychosocial needs, right? So like one is like sense of community. We can talk about human rights, or even like ethics, morals. And collectively, like the human rights and ethics and morals, that all falls under the social contract idea. And that's important because we have to come to some agreement. We have to kind of say like, hey, yeah, we're all going to follow these rules, and we're going to have a body of individuals that enforce those rules and arbitrate whether they've been broken or not, which is like the legal justice system, right? So that's kind of like, you know, with this, you have to have like legal / enforcement. And so in different ways, like when in Iran, protests like in the fall time, right? Like like there was the one young woman who wasn't wearing hijab or violated some haram kind of boundary, and then she was beaten to death. And so that was immoral. I would say it was unethical what they did to her, but for them it's seen by some as the moral action, and it was enforced by some governing body, these like Haram police. I don't know the specific term, but you understand what I'm trying to say. How can we, the purpose of being philosophical is to have some lens that is not limited to any specific area. It can transcend all the bounds, right? And when we look at our mental health, it's very similar. Like if I'm addicted to cigarettes and I know that that's bad for me, right? But I always go to the cigarette as a reward, as a means to deal with stress, right? Maybe there's certain times of the day, every time I wake up, I do it. So I've associated all these behaviors with the act of smoking cigarettes as part of my way of living. So to have a philosophical or a wise approach would be to say that I will always exercise control over my habits and make an effort to dispel the habits that aren't good for me, whatever that might be, right? And that just speaks to addictions like directly, right? So when we look at, so being philosophical as a methodology, we can rationally apply an understanding of a moral framework by some specific religion. So I give the example of Islam, right? Because if you use Islam to understand Islam, then Islam can never make a mistake. Same with Christianity. So we would need to have something that's higher ordered. And that's what as soon as you do that, you're being a philosopher. You're using reason as a means to understand the thing in itself. So if this is the thing that is, if there's a contradiction, like for example, be good is at odds with killing someone. And so you're like, okay, well, the religion's supposed to tell me to be good, but then like my sister got murdered. Well, how does that make sense? Right? So internally, it's incoherent as a belief system. And so the only way to really make sense of that would be to step outside of this belief system. And as soon as you do that, you're essentially being philosophical. Right? Because what are you going to appeal to? You can't appeal to the religion itself, because that's the thing that has born the contradiction that you're trying to figure out.
Okay, can I play the devil's advocate?
Yeah.
So let's say, would you say that religion also can provide a simplicity for some people that otherwise being philosophical, it has a lot to do, at least when I think about it, with the mind, with reasoning. Reasoning can get very complex, very, very complex. There may be like sort of a cost benefit analysis that they needed. Like you have lots of energy probably, right? You read a lot of books, you have this great energy. For some people, they want simplicity. They want something that is, what do you think about that? Like they may not have that sort of energy to try to, to read many books, right? You try to integrate many things into your day. That's a complex thing.
So that's where like the social organization in itself. So we have to flip pages here to another kind of topic. And so when you look at like the hierarchy of the philosophy society, right? You have like maybe like the master or masters, like people with PhDs, philosophy professors, people that might just spend time practicing, maybe lawyers. Like whenever you have a PhD, you're a philosophical doctorate of chemistry, right? So, but when I say master, I just mean someone who's very attuned in their skill. If you question them, they can demonstrate. There's no appeal to authority, right? When you say, oh, show me that the door is level, the master carpenter, boom, can do it. They don't just sit back in a chair and say, oh yeah, it can be done. I'll show you, right? So there's someone who has like a high level of skill. They're like an expert. And then we would go down, and then there's like different degrees, 2, 3, 4, 5. And let's say like down here, number 6, there's a lot of people that just don't have the time to read all these books. They don't have the time to study logic. They don't have the time to learn about schizophrenia and how to deal with somebody, unless it's like in your family and you live with the person. Now either you're proactive about it, or it's just going to retroactively you're going to have to deal with it regardless, right? We can try to like compartmentalize that and send the person away, but many families don't have that luxury, right? And it is even ethical to do that at some point. So aside from that case, we're down here with like, let's just say a significant majority of people in the world, right? What happens is this structure, we have certain social forces that will make like a ripple effect. So in some instances, these social forces or instincts, right, can be bad, like Milgram's conformity experiments, or like when Nazi Germany, Hitler almost took over the world and used propaganda to create the Holocaust. That was a bad use of these social forces, right? Like if somebody pushes me off the parkade thing, that's a bad use of gravity. It's not gravity in itself that was being unethical. It was the intention of some other individual. Or maybe my negligence. I was just being foolish and I slipped and fell. It's just my fault. So one of these social forces is like conformity. Another way to say it is like heuristics and biases. So if the underlying structure, like it doesn't even have to be the philosophy society, and whatever the organization is, like let's say the organization is Apple, right? The phone company. Right? If we're doing a consulting contract for that company, we can say, hey, we want to implement a social norm of emotional intelligence and critical thinking. And the leader of that organization, if they demonstrate those skills, all of the individuals below them will be able to mirror and see them as a role model. And so they're learning through observation. They can just emulate what that individual is doing. So for example, someone comes in late or something's not, there's a deadline that's being missed, and the individual who's in power demonstrates temperance, like they're calm and cool. There's some stoicism in here, which goes back to Aristotle's practical wisdom, right? They're not rash, they're not aggressive, and then they execute a problem-solving strategy to deal with that situation. Now, everybody below them observed how they did it in action, in the moment. So they may not know about like system 1, system 2 thinking, right? They may not know about the 6 steps of problem solving. Whereas the person who's mastered this stuff, to truly be a master, I think to some degree to be able to explain it. Like the demonstration part is part of it, but communicating what I'm doing when I'm leveling the door, being able to explain how I'm leveling the door, the justification factor is part of knowledge. There's the know how and the know what, right? And so this is even more so why I would justify that something like that the Philosophy Society as an organization is necessary in the world, because not only do people not have time, some people may not have the cognitive capacity to comprehend high abstract information. And if that's the case, they can still like observe people and enact through example how to behave and how to like deal with situations and whatnot. And we see this with kids. Like when you're growing up, you see your parents do stuff and then you emulate them, right? There is obviously a component of genetics here, but at the same time, we can learn to deal with our genetic predispositions and in how we express ourselves. That's the complementing it with training, right? So one example is, let's use conformity for good. Another one would be like the self-fulfilling prophecy. So the self-fulfilling prophecy is when initially my belief in a thing is false. Let's say I'm not good at reading, but I tell myself I have confidence. I'm like, I am a good reader. And then because I believe it, I spend more time practicing reading. And then I get better at it. So the false belief instantiates behavior that makes the initial belief true. And that can be a bad thing. If the cigarette smoker tells themselves, I'm just an addict, I'm addicted, I have no control. Well, that might not be true. But if you tell yourself that, it's not going to make it any easier to quit. There is a degree of acceptance and being realistic. Like I am currently suffering from an addiction. However, I have the willpower to overcome it.
So are you in some way saying that hierarchy is important in the sense that the person who is, let's say, competent needs to be sort of leading people or higher up in the hierarchy, like competence is something that is very important for the leader. Is that something that you're sort of?
Yeah. Like there can be like designated leaders, like you have the qualifications and you were hired as the manager, but then there can be emergent leaders in a social situation. An individual just runs into a burning vehicle and pulls somebody out of the vehicle and saves their life. Nobody gave them the role to be an emergency response person, but a combination of who they are as an individual and the situation resulted in an action that was clearly them taking the lead, right? And so, and others can observe that and then do something about it, right? Whereas if nobody does anything, that's like the bystander effect. That's not good. Bystander effect is with the increase of individuals at an emergency situation, there's a decrease that any one of them will do something about it because they think somebody else will do it. Whereas if you're the only one there, you can't defer responsibility to other people. But if there's 100 people there, I could be like, oh, maybe this guy will take care of it, right? So really, like when we go back to like the religious context, we have ambiguous, contradictory texts that an individual who is an expert is to interpret that for everybody else, right? But there's not really any consistency with that. And there's going to have to be some philosophizing within that theology. You kind of have to do that. There's no other way. You can't get around being philosophical at the end of the day, applying reason and understanding to make sense of that which is, whatever it might be. It's just that if you stay within the bubble of religion, it always becomes self-referential. It just goes on forever. And then you'll never really get out of these little dilemmas. Another one would be like, we have free will, but then God knows everything. So if God knows, how am I free? How are my opportunities endless if it's already predetermined, right? So that's another example of some kind of contradiction. And the solution is not logical, it's psychological. And that's the F-bomb. That's where people you have to have faith. So, and that's very subjective, right? It's just when I'm confused, I let go of my confusion, right? Because there's so much at stake. The afterlife, my entire community could disregard me, right? I may be left without a moral compass. I have these traditions and these practices that I do. And so the institution of religion is very ingrained within our lives. It's just very much a part of how we eat, how we dress. It's you know, it's a big deal. So if we were to talk about something like a philosophical oriented group, it can still include, you can still be religious, right? It's just that you recognize that you are choosing it. It's not choosing you. And I think that autonomy is very important. It's very important for you to have control over your beliefs, such that you don't think you're being good and end up killing people. Not that everyone does that, but we do see examples where it happens. And I would like to say that's wrong. There's a problem with that there. That's why there's so many riots in Iran. The people are not, and at this stage of the world, people are like, we're not fucking putting up with this shit anymore, right? Like Christianity went through that with the Great Witch Hunt, like burning, you know, dozens of people in large wooden structures. Like that's just, no, there's a better way to solve problems, right? Unless you say, well, it was just a power thing and it was a political thing and they did it intentionally and some people knew it was just crazy, but they did it anyways because they wanted to maintain power. Well, that's still, right? Like we don't really want psychopaths to be in control because they, by their nature, don't have any regard for anybody else. So that's not good. That goes back to social contract. We create the social contract to prevent, you know, the Machiavellian dictator from just fucking doing whatever they want with all the people. We've seen that for thousands and thousands of years. And so we created something of a democracy to say, let the people decide. And that has problems, and we can talk about that. And one of the only ways that I would say to solve the problems of democracy, because to say that the majority is always correct is actually a fallacy, because Hitler was voted in. So that's like, well, how do we prevent that from happening again? And the way that we do that is we just teach people to think and how to live well. And that was, I was discussing issues of the Kremlin, you know, taking advantage of the Russian people and using the Russian people against Ukraine. And that's terrible. And the propaganda that's being disseminated in that country, the lack of freedom of speech is inherently a problem. And so the values of being philosophical is not like, that's a threat to that state, that contract within that country that's found within the Kremlin, right? And so certain parts of the world, like China, North Korea, they just don't accept that kind of approach towards things, right? And so we say, well, who are you to say that that's right or wrong, right? We get the mirror of ethical relativism. So who says democracy is better than tyranny or dictatorship? I have a friend that spent a lot of time in China, and he's like, well, you know, like they like having someone make decisions for them, you know? But how could they know if they've never experienced true freedom, right? Like from a scientific perspective, you would have to test it. There would have to be some methodology, and really like we have to discuss fundamentally what does it mean to be human, and B, what are the notion of rights? Like, what does a right even mean? And a right is something that exists because we stand up for it, because we say we're not going to be like the animals that we are. We're going to be something more. We're going to be human beings, you know? And I like that. I like, personally, for me, I think that's a great thing. Like, I think that, you know, like a humanistic psychology, an existential psychology or existential philosophy has something to teach us. What it means to be human, you know? And when you get one human to say that you're the master doesn't mean that your rights are above these people. It just means that you have a degree of competency, and any one of these individuals can also achieve the level of mastery relative to their skill set. So someone who is a quadriplegic can't be, you know, a 100-meter dash runner. That's just incongruent. It doesn't make sense, right? So if I have prefrontal cortex damage, if I hit my head and I get brain damage, or my hippocampus gets damaged and I can't retain any new memories, well then, you know, doing some of these performance techniques here are going to be very challenging for me. So assuming that you're just at a base level of human, that you're just a regular person who can learn and figure shit out, you can master stuff, right? Like we can talk about the exceptional cases like geniuses and stuff like that, but at the same time, you know, what degree of training went into making those people who they are? Simone de Beauvoir said geniuses are not born, they're made. I don't have any psychological literature to reference based on that, but I do think that her quote is very empowering, and I would like to falsify it. You know, if you devote and that's like the Malcolm Gladwell 10,000 hours principle, you know, like to be a master violinist, you have to put a lot of time into it, and your neurons have to wire themselves to get you to that point. So when I talk about this hierarchy, it's a meritocracy. It's anybody that has sufficient a sufficient baseline of capability can reach that level, right? So going back to the ethical relativism thing, point here is that the mistake that the tyrant or the dictator is making is they're putting their own needs above everybody else's, right? In a selfish context that is not cooperative and not pro-social. And so the democracy is taking a pro-social approach towards how we have a collective group. And to say that the people don't know what's best for them, well, who are you to say that, right? When if we could just teach them something like this, some kind of a methodology, even religion isn't necessarily tyrannical or a dictator or a dictatorship, because they at least allow people to read the scripture and figure it out for themselves and to some degree choose to follow, right? It is very dogmatic and based on indoctrination, and there's a lot of problems with it, but you know, it's not, yeah. So there is a sliver of freedom there. Yes.
So would you say that democracy, let's say for a country like US or like in general, the society that has become like countries are in the order of millions, you know, it's like one leader for, let's say, 250 million people, whereas there may be like 200 ideologies in the US. Or so in the past, it was like there was tribes, 500 people, 1,000 people, and then so they would choose their leader. And that you could say that it represented the people, but now many people feel that, like, you know, let's say someone gets elected, Justin Trudeau gets elected, right? 40% of people think that, at least 40%, he doesn't represent them, right? Like that's like 15 million people.
Mm-hmm.
So I was wondering what do you think about that? Like societies, like just the size of the societies. Do you think it's optimal to have a leader for, let's say, 30 million, 40 million people?
Representative democracy might be more appropriate. Like the problem is that we have sovereign nations, right? So you have like a country, and that's like the United States or whatever. No, it's very poor polygon. And there's a lot that goes into that, like the enforcement of territory, like the Constitution. There's a lot of variables that to what makes a political state. And in some ways, the people of that landmass have to kind of decide on what's most important. There might be 200 ideologies, but like, you know, I guess if you're in that country, you kind of accept its constitution. And when you're of the age of majority, or when you're an adult, you can choose to leave if you wanted to. There is something that you said, well, if I was born here, I never got to choose, you know, or if I have intellectually deficient, like I have a disability and I can't comprehend, I don't have the ability to choose. But we have to prioritize what's most important, right? And so like people would say like the economy, like international relations, you know, like there's certain things that are ranked as the most important, and then individuals would just vote on that. They would say, well, this is what we think is important. Now, the problem that I see is If you lack the critical thinking skills to understand what values are most important for yourself and for your society, then how can you truly have a free vote? Or how can your vote really have meaning relative to that state if you don't understand it? Right? So like Trump got indicted on Friday. He got arrested for like stealing basically classified documents. And his response after he was arrested was, this is the greatest like atrocity in all American history, that the Espionage Act is being used for something that I have the right to do, and reframing things like a narcissist would to make it look like Joe Biden and all the individuals that are against him are corrupt. Right? But the problem is that he's not actually utilizing his reason. He's not actually going into the arguments and understanding the nature of what they are. Right? Like that's not, from someone that displays traits of narcissism, that's not how a narcissist does things. When a narcissist is under attack, they move their position instead of dealing with whatever comes their way. Right? And so they'll put the blame on you. Who are you to say anything? Or a psychopath, who are you to say anything about me? Right? And then reframe the social context that the fact that you criticize me is abusive. You're gaslighting me. Whereas someone that has a healthy sense of self-esteem can say, hey, like, I didn't mean to hurt your feelings. Like, did I say something wrong? Like, did I do something inappropriate? Like, please help me understand so I can change what I'm saying or my behavior. That's what a mentally healthy person would do. When we have a state, right, at the end of the day, we're going to have to agree on something. There's a lot of people in the world. And like, we could argue that maybe we need to have like small little cells, like, you know, but it's kind of what happens, because each area makes like vote on stuff, and then it just kind of congregates into one individual, and that person kind of just, you know, like at the state of the world today, that's kind of where we're going with things, right? Maybe we'll have a better way of doing it, but it's hard to say how that would change, because unless you have like a revolution, like when we look at the Kremlin, the only way for the Russian people to have autonomy over their country is either a civil war or, you know, some kind of like a false flag, but like some kind of a thing within the Kremlin government that overthrows them. You know, it's just like it's difficult to say how they would do that without it becoming violent, because they're the ones who are in power with the military, right? And they'll use that to the end of protecting the power that they already have. And then Trump attempted to do that with the insurrection. That's why he has like 2 or 3 more indictments that are like on the way. And so we go back to the previous issue, is that Trump was voted in, and he was displaying certain traits of what looks like narcissism, and maybe psychopathology, but more narcissism, that it's not really good for a leader to have. You know, like if you don't have empathy, or if you cannot accept criticism, then when you make a mistake, how are you to learn from that mistake? Right? And the hubris is just through the roof, because his lawyers told him to just give the documents back. Like Joe Biden, they found some documents with Joe Biden. Joe Biden's response: enter my home, like, come on in, just check everything. I didn't mean for that to be the case. And then there's no problems, because everyone makes mistakes. The difference with Trump, though, is that he actively prevented them from coming to get those documents, right? About like their nuclear program, for example. So it's like, dude, like that's not necessary. Like, unless you're selling that to some other country for whatever reason, you know, are going to use it for blackmail against your own country. And that's why the administrators in the United States government are very, like, many people are scared about this, because if you get someone that rises to the top, and they're not a master because of their merit, but because of the conformity issue or some other bias or heuristic, that becomes a problem. And Trump's a little dumb. If you had someone that was really intelligent, that really knew how to manipulate people, it wouldn't be all over the news. You know, like, it's foolish for Trump to make things so public to some degree. And that's why he's in this issue that he's in right now, because he convicts himself every time he says that, yes, I took the documents, they're mine. Every time he says that, he just digs himself a little deeper. right? Because you just showed intention to take something that wasn't yours.
So I think the thing with Trump is that, one of my friends was arguing that yes, that Trump is like he was agreeing with you that Trump is a narcissist, and I think there is merit for that. Like he exhibits a lot of those things. And I was telling him that, that's fine. However, 40% of people, around 40% of people voted for him. And it wasn't like they didn't get a chance to hear him out. Like there was this campaigns and there was this like, he had different people trying to sort of disprove him. So when we are talking about Trump, we are really talking about that 40% plus
Exactly.
40%. And that's what like that 44% is they found Trump the best representative among all options that like that's sort of what I think about.
I just had this image in my head of the day of the election when he won. The morning, the New York Times at the very front page had sort of projection on who was going to win, and it showed Hillary Clinton with an 85% chance of winning, and then Donald Trump having 15% chance. So it was almost kind of like a foregone conclusion, and then the surprise at night. I wonder, I'm just trying to kind of tie it in with what you said. Why is it that if that was sort of the consensus, how does he end up getting sworn into? How do people end up voting him in?
Well, I mean, the difference may be about, like, let's say he at least has 40% of the vote, right? Maybe the other 5-6% is questionable. But the 40% of vote, I think that it's not questionable. I would think that, like, yes, you can cheat to some degree, but like to that amount, like, even if we go by the sort of the polls that we had, like, yeah, at least 40%. 40% is a large group.
So this goes back to the previous point I was saying, right? So but you have one point. Your point was, how do you go from 15% to winning?
Right. So
Yeah.
doesn't that kind of make you question about the validity of what is being portrayed in mainstream media?
Well, they make projections based on which votes were counted. And so, like, if there's mail-in ballots, that's when Trump, when he lost the most recent election, he was like, there's these dumps, these vote dumps, right? It was just that they added in like 40,000 votes basically all at once because they were mail-in orders, or it was just a different way of counting that was not equally spaced out in increment. It was like a whole chunk of votes all at once. So it's hard to say until everything is counted who's going to win and who's not going to win. Because the 15-85 ratio seems like absurd that someone could jump up, so many votes, right?
I think James is talking about the probability of 85% to 15%.
I just couldn't understand where they got those numbers from. If the reality of the situation was the complete opposite.
Yeah, I don't think that there was an issue with voting fraud is not really a thing. Like, there's a very small percentage of voting fraud. Like, they spent a lot of money ensuring the most recent election for Joe Biden. Like, because Trump made such a big deal about it, like we could do more research on how they go through the counts and like what's going on with it. I don't have that information on hand. But I can speak to the 44%, we assume that's true, that did vote for Trump, right? And when we look at that, it comes down to like fundamentally values and that capacity for rational thought, right? Like, being reasonable is a value in itself. And part of the philosophy society is to socialize us to be reasonable. Is to give us a social context that rewards us and sets it as a norm, like this is the way we're supposed to behave. And when you act this way, it's good, and you're welcomed and included in the group. Now, I believe that there's a cognitive capacity issue. People could talk about intelligence. You know, if you lack the cognitive capacity for reason, like, look at it this way. Like some people are colorblind, right? They can't discriminate between green and brown. So if reasoning is like, has these peaks, and like, this is a valid argument, this is an invalid argument. And you have to be able to know the difference between the two, right? Some people might just see it like this. Just words. It's all the same. What matters to me is if this is in my self-interest. It doesn't matter if it's not reasonable. What matters is that I can use that to my advantage. And so in that case, you need to have this, where you can just be a role model and you would say, this person lacks cognitive capacity, but they can look up to this individual here, and this individual behaves in a certain way. And so they just model that behavior. So I'm just going to do this.
Yeah, so sort of like 4 being in touch with 3 and 5, sort of
Yeah.
like, yeah.
Just degrees of complexity. That's all that is.
Yeah.
Right?
Does that go back to what you said before about a self-correcting body?
Yeah. Because then when this person does only what's in their self-interest and lacks this, they'll never understand that. It's just beyond the computational capacity of that person. They're still human, but it's like a person who's colorblind. And so, because when you look at, like, so there's system 1 and system 2 thinking. System 1 is very based on heuristics. Trump is all system 1. System 2 thinking is about the rational argument, right? So if people are very system 1 oriented, that means that they're based in these biases and heuristics like conformity, or how like vibrant somebody is, like how entertaining and charismatic they may be. But what they say doesn't matter, like the content. It's just whether or not it triggers certain emotional states in them. So fundamentally, even though many people may not be able to comprehend reasoning to the degree that you would need to make sense of things, if there's a social system that's in place that they can at least follow the behavioral patterns and accept feedback when they make mistakes, that would be the self-correcting function that something, whatever you want to call it, philosophy society would be doing.
I just wanted to show you something. You might find it of interest. I was actually talking about this with my friends. So this is on the left side, you would see, I can put it here so everyone can see it.
Right.
On the left side, you would see different sorts of societies, right? The mafia, the clan, the social classes, the order, society as a whole, like revolutionaries, corporations, so different kinds of societies, right?
Mm-hmm.
And he ranks them in terms of spiritual, moral, and social.
Mm-hmm.
And it is interesting, for example, revolutionaries, they have no spiritual, according to this person, no spiritual, but they have a strong moral. But the social aspect is...
I'm going to show this to the cameras.
Yeah, sure.
You can see that. So where's the reference for this? Do you know the reference?
I can actually send it to the group if you
Sure.
find it interesting.
Yeah.
So, because it needs to be studied, right? There's a level of complexity to it. So a person needs to spend a few minutes to look at it. So maybe I can send it to the WhatsApp group and then with the reference as well.
Yeah, that's good. Interesting, right? So you see what my response is, right? Like, if we're in a democracy, our vote, the meaning of the vote is there's more meaning to it if it's representative to the current situation that we're in, state of the world. If the vote is based in just like emotional biases, then it doesn't have that same meaning. Social group or institution that we're part of, this philosophical lens or skill set can be used to understand whatever that group is, whether it's religion, some social movement like veganism, right? A political institution, educational institutions, so like there's problems with the university, and then cults. Cults are very adverse towards a philosophical methodology, right? Because they would be using conformity and appeal to authority and all these things that are just not good. James, is that you, Dimitri, or is that online? Just gonna check some online stuff here.
I heard my name.
There you go. Do you have anything that you want to say?
I was kind of multitasking. I'm cooking right now a little bit.
That's cool.
I just got home not too long ago.
How do you like the virtual attendance?
I was interested on the feedback part you were mentioning.
The feedback part.
Sorry?
You're interested in the feedback part.
Yeah, I heard you mention something about feedback. What, personal feedback, I believe you said?
Yeah, so
Or
like
giving feedback.
within a social group, if we have self-awareness and we can observe others without bias, then we can give ourselves and other people feedback so that it increases our awareness. So if somebody gives me feedback, it can increase my awareness, and then I can learn and grow more effectively.
And I guess the same could apply to personal feedback. Like the only way I guess you can get feedback to yourself is if you like try out different methods, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. So
To
like
get personal feedback.
if I'm trying to get a job and I go for an interview at a bar and I stutter and don't know my drinks well, I can accept that I can improve, and then I can study and I can practice. So then trial 2, maybe I stutter less and I know 3 or 4 drinks really well.
So it has to do with self-confidence as well.
Yeah, like self-confidence is or self-efficacy is my confidence that I can complete a task. So it would be that my belief that I will be successful. And then we can break down a strategy to increase my likelihood of success.
So self-consciousness stems from the lack of success in a way, is what you're implying? Or like less winning in a way?
When we go back to our burn stuff, the self-confidence in some ways is similar to self-esteem. It's like, am I capable of being successful in this task? And so if I have an automatic thought that says, no, you're not good at anything, that would be a distortion, all or nothing thinking. And I could replace that with an empowering thought, something that's based in the psychology of learning. So the principle or the thought would be, as long as I practice stuff and I'm aware of my weaknesses and improve on them, I can increase my chance of success in anything.
So we'll turn, like we'll raise their self-esteem as well, or the confidence, I guess.
Yeah, like your sense of confidence will increase as you have more success in the things that you're attempting to do. So you want to have realistic goals that are achievable, and then track those, and then don't disqualify your success within those goals.
When you say to set goals that are achievable, but what if like you are at a point of your life where like you want to like have a breakthrough, for example, so then your goals, will they still be quote unquote realistic if you're trying to like surpass the threshold? If your like, current goals and current habits that kept you where you are.
Yeah, you just want
to have to like. Sorry for interrupting.
That's okay. You just want to be realistic with whatever it is. Like you can't build a spaceship in one day, but you can start the blueprints, and then after a while you get the design figured out, and then you find all the materials, and you just got to do it one step at a time.
Okay.
So any goal that you have, you want to break that goal into simpler parts. Like let's say buying a house, owning your own property. You'd have to have enough money for a down payment. You'd have to have good credit, have to have income that you can show to the bank so that they will give you the mortgage. And then so you'd say, like, let's say I need $200,000 for the down payment. Well, I'm gonna have to find a job or some other access to income that will give me that money. But if I say, I'm gonna buy a house today, and I make it a very meaningful goal for myself, it's very unrealistic unless all of those things are in place.
Well, one thing that me and James were talking about before coming here, and it may be something that it may be of relevance. I think it may be of relevance. Is the concept of I'll show it to the camera.
Sure.
How are you? Hello. So I don't know.
Hi, Vedant. How are you today?
Doing well, thanks. So me and James we were talking about this Japanese concept of ikigai.
Oh yeah, very good.
Have you heard of it?
Yeah, yeah.
Ikigai, or I think that's how it's pronounced. Ikigai, or to do what you're passionate about, right?
So there are 4 circles, and one circle is what you're
Can you
passionate
put
about.
that back? I'll take a screenshot of that actually.
Maybe you can send the.
Sorry, I interrupted you. You were saying.
Yes, I will send it to the WhatsApp group. One circle is your passion. One circle is what you are good at. One circle is what the world needs, and one circle is what you can be paid for. So you enter as many things as you can for each circle, and then you find the intersection. Where all of them intersect is where the ikigai is. So it's like the intersection of all these circles. Your passion, the mission, what you're good at, and what the world needs.
Very good.
Right.
It's quite difficult to find as well because there's so many things out there that we might be naturally good at, so many key points of interest that we might have. So I feel like it's almost a lifelong, I don't want to say a chase, but it changes all your life, I believe, through your passions, your ikigai, if you put it like that.
Right. So it's like the concept is to find the intersection among all these. So it's like different parts of you can get satisfied, or you can integrate different parts of you. I'll send it in the WhatsApp group because I think that might be the best way. I'll send the concept to the WhatsApp group because it's a bit complex. So yeah.
Very good.
All right.
So does that mean that our ikigai changes as we grow older and we like evolve, quote unquote? Or is that something that we like stationary for?
Yeah, as you grow, your values slightly change and you get better at different things and you discover and learn new things. Okay, I think we're gonna end it there for today. Dimitri, everything you want to talk about?
Not really, no. I missed the beginning part of the class, so I kind of joined in a little bit late. Like probably within the last 20 minutes or so. But I'm gonna rush the recording.
That's okay. I'll upload it soon. I'm gonna edit the other one, then I'll edit this one, and then I'll upload it.
All right, sounds good. Do we have a lot of people this week?
There's the 3 of us here. And then we had 2 in the WhatsApp chat, so it's good.
Nice. That is good. I'm glad I made it even for a bit. Even
Yep.
though it's virtually, but it still works.
Okay, well, I'll talk to you soon.
Take care, Dimitri.
Sounds good. Have a good evening and thank you for your time, Michaela. And everyone else. Cheers.